First is that death and serious
This meeting is being recorded.
Are unacceptable. So this is a city has adopted plans and goals that we want essentially zero fatalities. No fatalities are acceptable. The next, that's probably my slide, is that we need to understand that humans make mistakes. We're all human. Nobody's perfect, and there's just a chance that things will go wrong. Another is that humans are vulnerable. We are subject to being hurt, and there's limits to what our bodies can withstand. Another is that responsibility is shared, and I don't know if it's on my end or okay. Is that responsibility is shared. Oftentimes when there is a fatal crash, there's a lot of finger pointing on somebody did something wrong and it's their fault. But the idea is that we're all a part of this. As road users, as road designers, as emergency responders, as vehicle designers, all those people play a part in creating a safe system. Another principle is that we need to be proactive with safety. So unfortunately, I'm going to be talking about the spirit of this discussion is to try to be more proactive, to identify things that have come from these and to be looking forward to what we can do to try to avoid them again. And then the last is that redundancy is crucial. We can do one thing, but the more things that we can do further limit the chances of a fatal crash or a very serious injury crash. So those are the general principles that we wanted to look at this framework from. And then there's a series of 5 elements. And they're summarized now on this slide. And the first is that we want to have safe road users. We want our systems to be designed to be safe for all users, but also as users of that system, we want to be operating in a safe fashion to maximize safety. And there's more and more technology that continues to come out. You could look as far back as we want to, from the advent to requiring seatbelts to all sorts of things. But there's just amazing technology, and it's exciting to think about what could still be forthcoming to improve safety. Safe speeds is an interesting element. In some ways, it's a part of the other elements, but I think it's identified here as its own independent thing because speed is such a crucial element when it comes to safety. When you think of physics and energy and the basic equations of what kinetic energy is and speed is squared. It's huge, so it just becomes a really, really important factor. Safe roads, wanting to design our roads to be as safe as possible. And that's really where I think this presentation is going to focus on that particular element, but we need to recognize it's one of many. And then last is post-crash care. So wanting to make sure when there is a crash, it's responded to promptly, that our emergency services, that our healthcare system, all of these things play a factor in helping people survive. So this is the last, I think, graphic I have from the Federal Highway Administration, but it's the idea of really trying to emphasize redundancy, like not a single element. It's really hard to have a single element to be 100% impenetrable. That if we do this one thing, there will not be a fatal crash. That everything has some imperfections in it, but the more things that we can do, the less likely that something can kind of penetrate through each of those levels and result in a crash. So we wanted to this is just trying to look at things as holistically as possible. I think that's just the quick overview I wanted to touch on before I jump in. And again, my presentation is more focused on the safe road element, but wanting just to highlight that as one of many that we need to be keeping in mind. So the first fatal crash I want to talk about occurred on West Country Club Drive. This happened on April 30th, a Saturday, about 4:00 in the afternoon. It was a dry, clear day. That's important. Like if it was nighttime, there's certain variables that might factor in. So this crash was a head-on crash. It occurred in the area of South Banta Drive. Though I want to make it clear, the intersection had nothing to do with this crash as far as we can tell from the crash records. But essentially it was a head-on crash. So it was an eastbound vehicle traveling on Country Club Drive, entered the westbound lane and struck a vehicle in the westbound lane. The exact circumstances that led to the event, we cannot definitively say why that person entered that lane, but the person that was traveling eastbound ended up dying as a result of this crash. And the westbound vehicle users, there were 2, were injured as a result of this crash. Just a Google Street View image. It's just important to understand the basic characteristics. Is a relatively narrow road. It's got curb on the north side of the road. It's got the country club and a lot of foliage very close to the road on the south side. It's a 2-way road with 1 lane in each direction. We've got a yellow centerline stripe that indicates vehicles are not allowed to legally pass each other. It's rolling. It's relatively in good condition from a pavement management condition. And it has a posted speed limit of 30 miles an hour. So now Wanting just to touch on the three and try to propose some responses to those. So the first is, what infrastructure design attributes may have contributed to this head-on crash? So really, there is the chance that is a head-on crash. And all that we have is a center line pavement marking that separates those two vehicle lanes that are each traveling potentially at around 30 miles an hour. So what steps could we do to potentially reduce the likelihood of such incident in the future? I mean, we could go any way. I'm not even going to list everything, but like this one way is you could make this a one-way road, then a head-on crash is not likely. That's all of these things. I'm just answering the questions, not necessarily making proposals or recommendations. But so one thing that we could do is create physical separation between the two directions of traffic. That could have like Jersey barriers like you have on an interstate where there isn't a lot of separation, or it could be very wide medians that provide a sufficient clear space, or in some cases, providing rumble strips is also another option that can help deter oncoming head-on crashes on roads like this. So then the last part of the request is what are the estimate of resources needed to implement either of these? So if we were to implement separating the two different directions of traffic, the costs would be very significant. There's a lot of challenges to widening a road. And so the cost would be significant, and they may have competing, they may create other issues beyond just addressing this single occurrence. The other option would be rumble strips, as I touched on. That would potentially have a much smaller budget impact, but that's not typically a treatment that we do when there are homes and people living nearby, or a golf course, or it's just not something that we'd necessarily recommend. And not to say that either of, anyways, those are just some initial responses to the Traffic Commission recommendations. I wanted to just mention, I think I did add a slide. So this is not necessarily specific to the crash that occurred, but just wanting to note that West Country Club Drive, we at the city have heard multiple concerns from the public about speed on this facility. I mentioned the speed limit, and we did measure speeds on this road, and people unfortunately do not follow the speed limit. And additionally, there is also a pattern of some crashes on the corridor, not head-on crashes like the fatal. So this is separate from that, but just it's something that came up as a part of our evaluation. But that crash pattern to people driving faster than they should in a given condition. So it's relevant to safety, but not necessarily specific to the crash that was I'm providing that report on. And so really here, the story I'm trying to share is there's limited safe road elements that we can do to, I think, effectively help the speed compliance or that head-on crash on this corridor, but there are other elements that we need to keep in mind as well. I think I'm going to jump. I know I'm touching on a lot of stuff and there might be questions, but just to try to keep things moving here. E Moores Pike. This was on June 15th at about 5 o'clock. This was a single vehicle crash in the vicinity of Clares Boulevard. Again, a crash near an intersection, but I would not call it an intersection related crash. It was not, the intersection doesn't really play a factor. In this incident, eastbound vehicle, a single vehicle ran off the road on the south side of the road, hitting multiple features and ended up passing away as a result after the crash. So this is, again, another street view image of that. So the person essentially ran off the side of the road on the south side, the right side of the screen. They hit the newly installed pedestrian, go over multiple curbs. You can see my mouse on the far end. There's like a neighborhood sign. They hit that sign and then ultimately hit one of the trees beyond that. And that's where the vehicle stopped. Eventually, the car got on fire and the person was pulled out, but did pass away after that crash. So again, just looking at this condition of the road, another two-lane, two-way road. Again, another 30-mile-an-hour speed limit road. The improvements that you're seeing here this was probably right when we were doing the construction, but in 2019, the city did a project here to improve the pedestrian crossing across Moores Pike, also narrowing the road, which is something that we would typically associate with lowering expected vehicle speeds. And so that's, I think, just the basic summary of the conditions. One thing I want to point out here is, of course, that there are roadside objects, including trees and signs, and those are factors in a crash like this. So infrastructure design attributes that may have contributed to the crash. Again, there's a two-way road. There's no guardrail on the outside of the lanes. There's roadside features, as I just mentioned. So what steps could have reduced the potential of an incident like this in the future? Potentially, they could install a guardrail that would keep a vehicle from exiting the road or reduce the chance of that. And then the other option might be to remove roadside features like street trees, which can have some trade-offs there. So the estimate of resources needed to take those steps, potentially installing guardrails on facilities with similar attributes as this. So there's no major drop-off. It's not a bridge. It would be really costly if we looked at it from a citywide perspective. And honestly, installing guardrails where there aren't certain attributes actually can create other safety concerns. So that's something that we wouldn't, none of these, again, I'm necessarily recommending, just reporting to the questions here. The other is the removal of roadside features like street trees. And that would have, of course, a financial cost, but it also has a cost contrary to many other city goals to create an environment that helps promote lower speeds, that helps, has a lot of environmental and sustainability goals, and are also, frankly, required as a part of some of our city ordinances and standards. So I apologize. I just went through this. This is the first time we're giving a presentation like this, and so I'm still kind of learning as well on how to present it, but happy to answer or any questions from the Traffic Commission on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Seward. Commissioner Iran? No, I thought you were grabbing for your mic.
No, I was just going to thank Andrew for the very thorough description of what happened. And immediately mine goes to things that are not related to the highway itself. Both of them seem to be things that my mind immediately goes to the medical aspects and what we would have found in looking at the two individuals who died in these accidents. But it doesn't seem like there's anything about the roadway. Clearly, Country Club and its speed is long question, and how we change things when we have it definitely posted as 30 miles per hour, and people continually do not respect the speed limit will always be our issue. And we know that the police are already overwhelmed and cannot manage the enforcement of speed. And I suspect that most of us aren't prepared to do citizens' arrests on individuals on the roadway. But it's really distressing that we cannot get people to understand that speed is a killer.
I appreciate that. And I think that's one reason I wanted to emphasize the safe roads system, that holistic approach. Sometimes there are limited engineering tools that we can use. On the speed topic, one of the tricks I want to maybe draw a little attention to is there are some proven safety countermeasures that are out there, but they're just not options that are legally allowed in the state of Indiana, such as automated speed enforcement. That is a tool that is taken out of the toolbox that does have a proven safety benefit in other communities. So just wanted to draw a little attention to that.
The only other thing that we've seen at all are the flashing signs that tell people what speed they're going. But at a certain point, that again has no real effect on people. But it's the only thing that I've really seen other than our speed humps. We're certainly not going to put charrettes on this. Whatever the stupid things are called. We're not going to turn this into a pretty little road. There's lots of elements that are not reasonable to put on this roadway. And yet we know that streets that have no obstacles, people see as being a throughway of sorts. So it's problematic at best.
Commissioner Alexander.
Thanks for the report. I know this is hard. I've got two questions. Obviously, these were both roads with 30-mile-an-hour speed limits, and the transportation plan says we should aim for 25. Like, it actually considers that a realistic goal that we can accomplish as a city. But the typical speed is closer to 40. Why can't we get drivers to actually go 25? I know these are hard things, but what's standing in the way of that?
That's a really interesting. That's a good question, and
it's amazing in this room. It is hard to hear. So I'll ask Ryan is kind of coming through really well. If everybody will just pull the mic close when you talk, if you don't mind. I appreciate it. Thanks.
I think the question was the city transportation plan suggests the speed on a road like this should be at 25 miles an hour. The posted speed's 30 and people are exceeding that. Like what can we do? And that's a good question on a road like this that carries the amount of traffic that it does, that needs to service large vehicles and emergency responders. There's truly, I think, limit, like it's already, I would say, relatively narrow. There's just not many, like that's where maybe tools like an automated speed enforcement or something like that would not overburden our police department and make sure things are treated consistently. It just eliminates some of those elements. But on roads like West 17th Street, we've done certain elements to try to do things, and we still see vehicles that do not. So it's cultural. It's more than an engineering challenge, I guess, is all that I could say.
Thanks. I was hoping for intersection redesign, honestly, because the intersections are huge. Like it looks like a narrow street, but it's got these huge radius turns. Anyways, and the other question is, given that we don't consider it realistic from an engineering perspective to achieve the goal of 25-mile-an-hour travel speeds, is that freshly installed pedestrian crossing beacon seeing significant compliance, or is there a significant problem with people going 40 miles an hour simply won't stop for a pedestrian?
So this rectangular rapid flashing beacon on Moores Pike. So Moores Pike, actually, the speed data we collected there is better than what we measured on Country Club. Why is I don't know if we measured necessarily the compliance rate of people yielding to pedestrians in that crosswalk. And I think right now it'd be difficult to do because we are, I think, down at one of those beacons because it was hit by this crash. So that's something we could probably look into in the future. Thanks.
Do we know beyond that space where indeed you have you're going the speed message, have we lowered people's speed in that section, which is east of here? I know every time I see it, it's a great reminder to me, and I don't travel Moores Road very often, but I really appreciate seeing that at the other crossroad, at the other crossing. And I know that it's a reminder to me, and I don't know how much everybody else is respecting that.
I think I can speak at least generally to those. I might have to do a little more research on the specifics of that location, but I think the general research industry standard thought process would be that when those type of devices are first installed, they have a noticeable impact on measured vehicle speeds, but that over time, that benefit decreases as it just becomes another sign that people see and becomes a part of the background that just maybe gets lost in the noise.
Further questions for Andrew? David or Freddie?
Yes, just a quick comment. We've discussed this before. I believe, and I've stated this before, that part of the problem with speeding is the lack of enforcement. You might recall that we were visited last November by Ryan Chambers. He's finally got back to me with data on crashes in Bloomington. He had previously given us information about failed crashes in the county. I'm trying to correlate that right now with data on the issuance of tickets, speeding tickets in particular. I haven't come to any conclusions yet. I will bring the conclusions to you when I have them. But I believe that the city is not enforcing speed limit. That's a primary cause of people speeding.
I don't have anything to add.